Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Perspectives in Global Development Seminar Series, a weekly series of talks by innovative development practitioners and thought leaders from around the world. Today's presenter is Dr. Joni Palmer. She's currently a member of the research and teaching faculty at the University of New Mexico in the departments of Community and Regional Planning, and also the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. For over 30 years, Joni's professional life has been a blend of practice and academia. Her professional practice experience in planning, in design practice, working in both the public and private sectors includes working for municipal, state, federal government, and private firms in a number of cities around the United States. Her practice realms include research consultation, community engagement strategy, strategic planning, community environmental planning, and arts and cultural planning. Dr. Palmer's interdisciplinary research focuses on the intersection of human-environment relations and landscape design and community planning. She's interested in social and cultural aspects of water, especially in rural and disadvantaged communities. Today, she'll talk about some of her work at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, which is a unit within the University of New Mexico's Center for Water and Environment. And by the way, it's sort of a homecoming for Dr. Palmer. She completed undergraduate studies here at Cornell, doing a dual major in city and regional planning and also in design and environmental analysis. She went on to earn an MLA degree at Harvard and a doctoral degree in human geography at University of Colorado Boulder. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joni Palmer. And here's your clicker.
Oh, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Is that good? All right. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be back here at Cornell. Wonderful place to come back to. So today I'm going to be talking about transcending disciplines to develop and finance green stormwater infrastructure, which is the work that I do at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And so there's, a few threads here. So 3 threads. One is transdisciplinary, which is very foundational to the way I work, teach and practice. Career trajectories. How do we get to the places that we end up at various points in our career, but also at the end of our careers, or maybe towards the end of our careers. And then the last is green infrastructure. So I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote several years ago. And when I was thinking about this lecture, I was thinking about what is it that makes us do the work that we do? Why do we do the work that we do? And hopefully we care about it. It's meaningful to us. It's a part of how we help to enact change in the world. And so this poem is kind of that articulation of an aha moment for me. So generational thinking. Norman reminds me each class how important it is to think generationally. I am in my middling years and realized just this fall, while teaching the environmental issues class that I've taught 5 semesters in a row, that I only started thinking about future generations in a concrete way when my nieces were born. It was just a subtle thought then, a distant future. But as they've gotten older and now that they are young women, I worry about the kind of world they will face as adults and what kind of world their children and their children's children will live in. What's so very hard for me to imagine are my great, great, great grandnieces and nephews and their children's lives. 7 generations after my parents, who saw so much change in their lifetimes. They lived through the Great Depression and saw Hitler come to power, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Korea, Vietnam, DDT. My mother kept the series of articles that Rachel Carson published in the New Yorker the summer before I was born. She showed them to me on the first Earth Day. And now they say that the next generation's Yellowstone will be nothing like the Yellowstone of today. 7 generations from now, Yellowstone will be warmer. There will be less precipitation, snow or rain, and less forest, more invasive species, drier, hotter summers, warmer rivers and streams, and less snowpack, increased wildfire, fewer megafauna. And these are just the headlines. A Park Service ranger back in 2018 talked about the years of denial and now frustration and anger. And these are just the first stages of grief and loss. I hope we never reach acceptance. Let anger be the place we pause and be thankful but cautious, cautious yet hopeful, hopeful and proud, proud of our work, but not complacent. So when I wrote that poem, you know, I was in the middle of thinking about what am I going to be doing in this latter part of my career, and luckily, I landed at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And the Southwest Environmental Finance Center is at the University of New Mexico. We're part of the Center for Water and the Environment, a very important center in a place like New Mexico and the arid Southwest. You can visit our website and see a little bit about the various projects that we work on. I'm going to talk about a few different projects today related to green infrastructure, community engagement, and community planning. So we are, just to give you a little bit of background, we are part of a network of centers. One of them is just up the road at Syracuse. I do a lot of work with them. Amazing folks. And also I do a lot of work with the folks in Kansas. So we are a network that we rely on each other, and we have various expertise that we work in. And these are just some of those areas. A lot of the work that we do is in technical assistance, but it's also related to water systems management, as well as, and I'll be talking about this quite a bit today, is how do we finance this work, especially green stormwater infrastructure. So I'm really proud of this, that our governor just announced our 50-year water action plan. And it's actually for me, I'm always interested in the visuals. Is it graphically, is it clear? Is it easy to read? And so you can see here our current water use, but also what we're thinking about for the future. And I'm really excited about being a part of some of the work we're going to be doing across the state as we think about water in a decreasing water supply in the state. So this is the foundation. This report from 2018 is the foundation of much of my work at the Southwest DFC. And in terms of the water sector, and I had to learn this, I'm only 3 years in working at the center, working in the water sector. You know, what is the water sector? And when I tell people I work in the water sector, my family says, you do what? So it's a lot of different, there's a lot of different people from engineering. Our center is housed in engineering, but also includes construction, planning, communities. We're talking about community outreach and engagement. Actually, how do you have genuine community outreach and engagement? Contractors, the people who are on the ground working with the pumps and the pipes. So the water sector is very broad. And one of the key notes from this report is, and this is from 2016, and the numbers, you know, relatively, you know, increasing in terms of those numbers, especially with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, is nearly 1.7 million workers are directly involved in working in the water sector. That's a lot of people. And it's a really wide range of people. But one of the main things that caught my attention and my colleagues' attention is this. We are, as they're calling it, a silver tsunami, right? We have a lot of our older workforce that is retiring, and water workers tend to be older, they tend to be male, and they tend to be white. So something that we've been working on is how do we tell people about work in the water sector to diversify the water sector, but also to get young people interested in something that is really important. Water is life, right? Get involved in this particular arena of work. So one of the threads is transdisciplinary, and a lot of times people think of this as a very academic term. But to me, it really is a way of knowing and being in the world. And so transdisciplinary, it's the inclusion of stakeholders. It's the inclusion of those people who are on the ground, those local knowledges. It's about participatory problem solving, and its approach that is about tangible, real world problems, that we're going to solve this in terms of a co-evolving, co-creative activity. So it's about complementarities. It's about evolving our knowledges and our abilities to do the things that matter in the world. So interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, those are all terms that I've used in my career, but transdisciplinary, as I've gotten into the water sector, has really hit home for me because it is all of these things that I was just talking about. So what is green infrastructure? The EPA has a definition, and we are primarily at the center. We are funded. A great deal of our projects are funded by the EPA. So this is a good place to start. And so it defines green infrastructure as the range of measures that use plant or soil systems, permeable pavement or other permeable surfaces or substrates, stormwater harvest and reuse, or landscaping to store, infiltrate, or evapotranspirate stormwater and reduce flows to sewer systems and also to our surface waters. So we're thinking about, what is that water that actually comes out of your tap, right? We're thinking about that groundwater, aquifers, surface water, and different cities rely on different amounts or percentages of those for their water resources. So there's a lot of terminology when we talk about green infrastructure. Green stormwater infrastructure, the focus is on stormwater. Blue-green infrastructure is a term that there's a group at Texas A&M that's doing some amazing work around blue-green infrastructure with that emphasis on water as well as plants. So putting that in the forefront. There's also the nature-based infrastructure or natural or ecological infrastructure. There's low-impact development. And then there's GI, green infrastructure, which I'll be using when I'm talking today as a kind of shorthand for all of this. So again, from 2023, and this is just getting further to the point of thinking about sustainability, environmentally friendly, cost-effective, that we're creating ecosystems, living systems, green systems, natural systems to treat polluted stormwater runoff prior to it entering our aquifers, streams, and our other waterways. And this is, really important. As I was walking around campus today, lots of impermeable pavement, right? There's some stuff going on here I noticed on campus, but a lot of pavement. And so where does that water go? And oftentimes in a lot of places, when we have heavy flooding, heavy rains, storms, those systems are overburdened and causes a variety of problems. One of the things I'm interested in, particularly, and maybe this is because I live in New Mexico, which is a rural state, is, and this is from a talk I gave this summer, why green infrastructure in small cities, towns, and rural areas? We tend to think about it in urban areas. That's where we see all the sexy stuff that's happening that landscape architects, planners, architects are working on. But there's a lot of stuff out there that is about how, for these communities, how are they going to have high quality water? And also we're thinking about habitat. And that's why I have this image in here next to a road, right? So we're thinking about the pollutants coming off of that road. Here's a housing development, right? There's a lot of different factors that can impact the quality of that water. And if we think about it on a continuum, and this is from a Canadian study, and I really like this visualization because it talks about this broad range of when we talk about natural infrastructure from gray infrastructure, and how we're not talking about getting rid of gray infrastructure. It's not really possible, though the pessimist in me says in 100 years, it's all going to be green infrastructure. That's if you're into cli-fi and all of that kind of stuff. So how do we integrate it so that we can deal with all of these various issues? From stormwater, most recently, you're hearing a lot about heat, extreme heat, but also coastal hazards, floods, and things like that. And then we think about the ecosystem services as well as the various benefits, the co-benefits that both sides, ecosystems, the human and the non-human worlds actually benefit from green infrastructure. And another level, I was thinking about this, is of course level of service, right? Because when we talk about the water sector, we are talking about a service that is being provided to people. And so we have to think about these various levels from the technical and thinking about natural areas and planting and species in the urban environment. We're also thinking about customer level, right? So how are people being impacted by this? Corporate level, we're thinking about, and especially most recently, we're hearing a lot about green infrastructure and urban forests. And then at the top are those strategic objectives, is biodiversity, that really, really big picture, the kind of penultimate that we are trying to work on. So funding is a big part of the work that we do. And something that I've learned from my students over the years is they get out into practice and they say, how do projects get funded? You know, we're doing these projects. Who funds them? We don't necessarily talk about that much in school. And for green infrastructure, one of the main funders is through the Clean Water State Revolving Funds. And this is a federal program that administers money to states that then give it to, through an application process, that give it to water systems, communities, utilities. And the area that I'm thinking about today is this Green Project Reserve, which is a % of money in every state that goes for green projects. There's also partnerships, which are really important, is finding partners to help you figure out that the financials of it. And then community ownership, and thinking maintenance. And we see this in a lot of the really small scale green infrastructure. If people own it, they care about it, they're going to help take care of it. And I'm going to go through these two pretty quickly, and this is because you're getting the PowerPoint slides, so you can have these as a reference. A couple case studies, and this is where, bringing together 31 municipalities, right? That's a lot of work. And so you can imagine kind of the administrative capacity that's needed. They applied for clean water funds, and were actually able to do quite a bit of work, but this is because they had to come together. And this is always an issue, right? Imagine bringing 31 municipalities together to come work on something, but it's being done. It's being done in New Mexico. It's being done here in Pennsylvania. Here's another example on tribal lands. And this one is in terms of the tribe receiving money, but also thinking about how the other organizations that they partnered with, and so they partnered with the Forest Service and a variety of other organizations to be able to do the work that they wanted. And that is this outcome, right? Which is very important culturally, very important to the to their lifeways. At our center, one of the things that we really focus on is shovel-worthy projects, not just shovel-ready, but is this project something that that community can own? And so we're talking about community culture, community values. Do they have the financial capacity, thinking about sustainability over time? Do they have the ability to use the technology of these systems that are being put into place? It's nothing worse than having a system, a treatment plant, meters, whatever, installed, and then nobody knows how to use them. And then also operations and maintenance. You always have to think about that. We can't just design things and let them be, right? So these are the things to that shovel worthy. And it's what we try to work on with the communities that we work with, which is where I work primarily in this realm. And in this top bucket, in terms of that community outreach, is getting people to know about green infrastructure and the funding that's available to be able to do that work. So this is about promoting these programs. And then we have to inform and educate so that we can actually engage. And you can see in this diagram that, you know, a few fall into this community engagement saying, yeah, we're ready. We have the capacity. We have the interest. We have the need. So help us. So we help them develop projects, build their capacity, explore funding options. We help them with the funding applications, and then help them go all the way through the process. Once they get the money, other issues are implementation, construction management, and paying off those loans. So we help them through that whole process. So New Mexico, there's two SRF programs, state revolving funds. The one I'm focusing on are the clean water, which is about water quality. Drinking water, if you're interested in that, that's addressing primarily public health. And so it's kind of like a water infrastructure bank. And so the federal government, EPA, is giving money to the states who then this becomes a revolving fund that those monies continue to move through the system, and people are able to, year after year, grows over time, be able to tap into that. So the state of implementation of green infrastructure, most of it, as you can imagine, is on public parcels and private redevelopment. And much of that is, and we see much of it in urban areas, but there's a lot happening the National Forest Service at the watershed level, thinking about our sources of water. And then also we have right of way. So we can think about in medians and along sidewalks and places like that. And the next big frontier is private residential parcels, is getting people to think about what is their landscape. So here, this is if you're interested in this is a great report from EPIC, which is one of our collaborators, the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. And this shows the states, and you can see Vermont and Delaware are up at the top in terms of the percent that they are investing in green infrastructure. And so you can see, you know, all the way down here, right? It's a matter of, in terms of the states having the capacity and then the states helping utilities and communities to have the capacity to apply for those funds and then be able to implement them. And so, you know, one of the biggest issues with green infrastructure is in the clean water SRFs is the money is for planning and design, construction, and building it. But it's a living system, and it takes 3 to 5 years for that system to be in place and to survive, maybe even thrive. So the biggest issue is that these funds don't necessarily cover those operations and maintenance, and that's something that this organization, EPIC, and some other organizations around the country are working on to make this vegetative establishment period as part of that capital cost. That's part of implementing it. And then you have operations and maintenance, and you have to think about how are you going to afford that. And so a lot of what we do is targeted technical assistance and public outreach and engagement in order to tell people about these programs and to think about whether this is a project that they want to pursue. Do they have the capacity to pursue it? So there's a lot of drivers behind why communities pursue green infrastructure. And the four primary ones are water management and regulation, is abiding by permits and things like that, not wanting to be in violation. Flood resilience. 19.4 million socially vulnerable people live in highest risk areas for flooding. And this is urban and rural, 19.4 million. Also aging infrastructure. We're hearing about that all the time, all different kinds of infrastructure. And then community quality of life. And then even more recently, a fifth one to add is addressing urban heat. So this is our process, is starting out with this community outreach, going all the way through working with these communities, developing tools and resources, but evaluating success. If we are not monitoring our work so that we can share our successes and our failures, we're working individually, silos, then we're actually not advancing. Those advancements can't really extend out the way they have the possibility to. So you get to see some of my sketching. There's a lot of barriers to applying for state revolving funds, and that occurs at a variety of levels. It occurs at the federal, the state, the municipal, and also communities. And one of the biggest things we've learned through our research is one of the biggest barriers for communities is they don't get the information. The information is too complicated. It's too confusing. There's a lot of paperwork. So we want to help them. What are those barriers? And then how do we get a soft landing, right? So we're helping them, and then how do we get them through and then operating and maintaining? And so those barriers are financial, they're legal, they're regulatory, they're technical, and they're physical, and they're also community and institutional. And so we're thinking about, insufficient access to information about green infrastructure. There's a lot of misinformation, unfortunately, out there that is growing. So we've done a variety of case studies to help us better understand what are some of the best practices and sharing these out. And at a very basic level, how do people find the website, right? I mean, you say, oh, just go to the SRF website. So, and how clear is that? How clear is that website? And in doing that, also thinking about once people get to that website, are their eyes going to roll back in the back of their heads because of the paperwork and the process? And that's part of our technical assistance, is walking people through the whole process. So I want to mention a couple other barriers. We can think about it in terms of people, process, and funding. So if we think about people, one of the main ones is lack of leadership. It is, we need those champions. We need those people who we're going to work with. And I'm talking about elected officials. I'm talking about community organizers. Process is this siloization, but also this bureaucracy that makes it so difficult for people to even imagine embarking, right? And then there's the funding. And the insufficient funding for maintenance is one of the big barriers for why green infrastructure is not as widespread as we'd like it to be. And again, just doing these case studies, sending these out so that people, we're sharing them with states and with communities, sharing best practices so they can improve, especially at the state level, some of their practices for what they're doing. So this is the big project I'm working on right now, and it's through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Our center got $4 million to work on water, wastewater, and stormwater assistance. And one of the things that we're finding that is, really difficult is that community outreach and community engagement, coming up with the strategies for different types of communities, it's a creative process. And it's also a process that we have to share what we all are doing so that we can learn from one another. But the new terminology out is community outreach or community engagement fatigue. Is communities are feeling just, this barrage of information that and attention, but not really genuine. So how do we make it happen in ways, and this is about relationship building, right? It's about breaking down those silos. It's that transdisciplinarity that we're working with stakeholders, we're working with academics, we're working with people in the field, we're listening to each other. We're learning from local knowledge that can then build across regions and then across the nation. So coming back to this renewing the water workforce, if we're going to be installing all of this green infrastructure, we have to have the planners, the designers, the contractors, the maintenance people. We have to have all of those in place. And so water workforce development is a big part of work I do with the people up at Syracuse. We have a water leadership program. And then at Wichita State, where we're working with K through 12 to help young people learn early about these various careers. And so how do we diversify? We have to get out into those communities. And something that during the pandemic, I did a podcast series interviewing water sector workers. The people the water operators out there, pipes and pumps, they are critical workers, right? There are essential workers. And so when we think about, those essential critical infrastructure workers, water is one of them. And when I talked with these people working in their communities, small towns, small utilities, they said they loved their job because they were doing something for their community. They had a purpose. It was meaningful. I've got 2 minutes. Okay, so when we talk about the water sector, we need to have these leaders to provide that, to be the champions, to provide clearer guidance, to actually make legislation and standards and all of these things happen so that we can make green infrastructure happen and make it happen so it's successful. And so we can scale it up and scale it down. So an example of this, something else that I'm working on in terms of water workforce development is having these apprenticeship programs, internships, externships, working with young people, because a good paying job in the water sector, you can get that with a high school diploma or GED. We're also starting to see, just very recently, an announcement by the Biden administration about community colleges. How can we make those associate degrees be something that people can go out into the field, make a good living, and feel like they have a purpose, that they're actually contributing to their community. So this is just one example. If you're interested in the apprenticeship programs, I have a database of them that I've been collecting, and I'd be happy to share them with you. They're starting to grow. And this one is a pretty amazing one. So there's stuff happening out there. This is Brad Lancaster out in Tucson, Arizona, in his neighborhood, Dunbar Spring. He's been working since the 1990s to show that green infrastructure can happen. And he has all these before and afters, and you can see some of the different landscape. These are their sidewalks, right? The city has institutionalized a lot of these pioneering processes and the different projects. They're institutionalizing it through a department called Storm to Shade. Amazing group. So there's stuff happening out there. There's good examples. You just have to look for it. You can look at Brad's website. Rainwater harvesting for drylands and beyond. A really, really amazing resource. And then, well, maybe now you all think I'm a crazy lady, but this is that transdisciplinarity. I'm working with a group of stakeholders in Albuquerque, the Albuquerque Water Authority, Bernalillo County, the city, Public Works, an amazing community-based group called ARID LID, some landscape architects and architects, to figure out what kind of research and what kinds of webinars and trainings do we need in our region that is going to help all of us be able to advance green infrastructure. And this is about finding those synergies. What are we all working on that we're going to be able to bring these together and have an outcome that is really productive for a wide range of people? And then lastly, I'm really excited about this. The EPA just announced their inaugural Artist in Residence, that they are partnering with the NEA, using the arts and culture to educate people about water. And so I'm scheming away as to how I can get involved in the Rio Grande project and really make some interesting things happen. And this is from Forecast Public Art. It's a great recent issue about artists and climate change, and shows you toolkits and examples and all sorts of stuff. We need to see examples, and then we can build on them. So if you want to reach out, you can find me here. You could find me there. That's in Ireland. One of my happy places. And I guess that's it.
Okay, thank you, Joni. We have about 10 minutes for questions. First question. Let me start with one then, while you're thinking of them. To what extent do these financing arrangements involve funds transfers from water users downstream to stewards of the watershed upstream in the watershed?
There's different funding if you want to work at the watershed level. There's different federal and state funding. The National Forest Service is doing some amazing things. We're starting to see, as part of the 50-year water plan for New Mexico, is bringing all those together, because watershed, right? Mm-hmm. Watershed thinking, that, you know, we have to think about is, where is our water coming from? And then that green infrastructure is going to be built with that in mind. So they're different funding than SRF. But so in New Mexico, there's various philanthropic organizations and other municipal programs.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Question? Yes.
And I'm going to move closer because I'm having a hard time hearing.
Keep it right up close.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I really enjoyed the talk. And I was interested in the concept that you mentioned earlier about transdisciplinarity and kind of how that informs your work. And I was wondering if you could speak to it specifically in the case of water infrastructure, how that might shape your thinking.
Yeah, you know, it really hit home for me what transdisciplinary is. I had been saying, you know, that it's important, but it wasn't until I started working in the water sector. And so, for example, we're working with a group of very small water systems, like under 3,000 people, under 100 people, up in northern New Mexico. And when you sit down with these people who are managing their water systems without a lot of knowledge, they're just kind of learning on the job. That you learn about those local knowledges. You learn about the knowledge that people have from that experience. You know, I have a PhD, right? Great. You know, but I don't know anything about pipes and pumps. I don't know about how those systems work in small communities. So that transdisciplinarity, we bring together different organizations to help those small systems be able to have quality, high quality drinking water. So it's the academic, it's the people on the ground, it's the engineers, it's the nonprofits and things like that. So to me, that transdisciplinarity, transcending disciplines, but also I think kind of professional silos.
Thank you. I saw another hand back here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think the only time I've really thought about water is my water bill. So this was very informative. I was curious how much GI is incorporated in overall ag development, because I think
Again,
I was curious how much green infrastructure is incorporated in agricultural development,
right?
because it seems that there's an informatics barrier between the two in terms of developing different agricultural innovations and then how that impacts the water line and water stream. So an example is building a dam that had salt water,
Mhm.
and then your consequences like you have fresh water so you can grow plants, but then with that comes a bunch of parasites so you have to kind of like deal with.
Right, right.
Do you think there's a lot of information crossover between the two fields, or is it kind of separate in a way that maybe economics is separate from sociology?
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
have issues like that.
It's emerging. And if you go to the, talking about green infrastructure and agriculture, the New Mexico 50-year water plan is trying to attend to that, because the majority of our water in New Mexico is used by agricultural and industrial entities. So, and we are at risk of over tapping our groundwater, our aquifers, and getting into brackish water. And so how is that going to impact agriculture in New Mexico? And so that's something that's kind of relatively new, but it's starting to emerge. It's emerging alongside of agriculture, solar, and rural development. So I would look in those realms.
Okay, thank you. And
Yeah.
I had a quick
Yeah.
follow-up, if that's okay. I was wondering if, but like for these communities, there's a greater difference between offering water or security as a private good versus a public health good. So the incentive is like, this is helping you as an individual versus like, everybody should jump into this and promote it for like the greater overall health being. Do you know if there,
Right.
have you seen differences in those incentives or?
Definitely.
Okay.
So when we're working in small communities, a lot of times we're in communities of like 300 people. You will have people saying, I just want the water on. I just want it on. And something that we're working with, we're calling it Aguas del Norte, is these communities in northern New Mexico, is talking about regionalization and getting people to think about, it's not just this one little community, but all of us. And this is again going back to that watershed thinking. So it's not just about one person thinking about their tap and having clean water, but also what is it for this larger community? And then also what about the non-human community? And so kind of opening that up, going back to the levels of service up to that biodiversity. And, you know, and that's something that as I talk with people, you know, learning that, yes, they are concerned about the water coming out of their tap. How do we help them have the capacity to then open up to thinking about these bigger issues? And those are conversations. That's relationship building.
Good. Questions? Oh, yes.
How do you see the difference between attitudes towards water and towards green infrastructure in urban versus rural communities who have different experiences and interactions with the water system and how it's provided in their regions?
Yeah, you know, when you say green infrastructure in rural areas, you know, they're like, oh, that's for cities. That's not for us. And so it's a matter of translation, is going back to the definition of what green infrastructure is that we are trying to, when you have these large storm events and in these rural communities, these county roads and pollution from both agriculture, from the chemicals and from the roads, that getting people to realize that we can do something so that their quality of water, not only for their livelihoods, for their agriculture, that we can improve that. And it doesn't have to be big, fancy, sexy stuff, right? I mean, we're talking about how do you take roads, turn roads into green systems, right? How are we going to get the water and all those chemicals off and be able to filter it so that when it goes into the natural environment, that it is not negatively impacting habitat. So it's a slightly different conversation that we have. It really gets down to, it really hits home when we talk to the smaller communities, because they really are thinking about their fields. They're thinking about, they're also thinking in New Mexico, particularly after the fires from a few years ago, is thinking about, well, you know, that in terms of that source of water and having a fire, how is that going to impact their community socially and culturally? Will they be able to survive? A lot of small towns, or quite a few in New Mexico, are on the verge of disappearing because of the wildfire and the floods. That it has these elderly communities that hold a lot of cultural knowledge are disappearing. So it goes all the way down to that end.
Thank you.
Just a follow up to that, I find that a lot of the rural communities in the area that I hail from, one of the things that resonates is protecting wild trout streams and reducing local taxpayer tax burdens associated with gravel road maintenance, which is a a big contributor to sedimentation in streams and reservoirs in a lot of areas in the Northeast. Other questions? Yeah.
Thanks, Tilly. I am from Laos. I'm Sai. Your topic very interesting for me. And my question, what are different methods of the water management that can be utilized by the local community?
So different kinds of investment.
Uh,
I'm having a hard time hearing today. I'm sorry.
My question.
Yeah, he's asking what are different methods of water management that can be utilized by local communities?
Oh, okay. So water management. Again, when we talk, EPA organizes water systems by size: extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. And so for each of them, there's different types of management that is needed. So a lot of my work is rural. And the water management in very small communities, so 300 people or so, or 300 connections, they have a board, they have a volunteer board. This is one of the biggest issues that we're having in rural America, is those volunteer boards are mostly elderly. They're starting to, like I talked with someone a couple summers ago and they said, well, you know, our treasurer is probably going to die next year. I mean, that's a horrible thing. But he laughed and he said, you know, we're all going to die very soon. So what are we going to do? These water systems then just disappear? What happens to those communities? And then, so it's then about hauling water. I mean, we think about the Navajo Nation and not having access to that infrastructure. So water management, it depends on the size. And so you go all the way from those small boards, volunteer boards, all the way up to those big, like Washington, DC water, right? And so then you have a lot of levels of leadership. I am particularly interested in these smaller communities and how we can help boards to recruit. And then also, I mean, one of the things, and this comes to your question that we were talking about earlier, regionalization. One of the solutions is to bring these systems together, because if those boards start disappearing, water access disappears. But if we can do it at a regional level, and we're working on that in northern New Mexico. Yeah.
Okay, so one hand back there. Last question.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I'm interested on the access to water. Yeah, water is said to be a public good. So each of us should be accessing to water. And what we notice is, in most areas, they say that water is not safe. The water coming from the tap is not safe for drinking.
Right.
So people are obliged to buy for drinking water. So what do you think about people buying to access water? Is it the responsibility of the government, or is it private companies who should be engaged in it? What's the future?
I mean, that's always, part of the conversation is it something that we hand over to the private sector? And we've seen some of that happen. And then the first thing that jumps to my mind is, Denver handed over parking to a private entity, and they've had a lot of problems in terms of quality control. So access, I mean, Flint was, unfortunately, the raising the alarm of, that we have a lot of dilapidated infrastructure, and people are drinking poor quality, actually dangerous quality water. And so that's part of what the bipartisan infrastructure law is about, is to be able to get out there, and groups like us and a bunch of other entities helping communities diagnose their problem. So that's one of the first things. So I talked with a system the other day from Louisiana, and they said our water is brown and really smells bad. Can you have somebody come down and diagnose our problem? First, we have to know why that is happening, and then help us come up with some solutions to how we're going to resolve that, and then help us find money. Right? So it's a multi-step process, but mostly in these communities, it's diagnosing the problem. And that takes time. And it takes a lot of expertise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.